The bitter wind of December stung his face as he stood outside a luxury skyscraper in New York City. His coat was thin, riddled with holes, and offered no real warmth. Edward Carter, a homeless veteran, clutched his battered backpack tightly as he scanned the bustling streets. The city was alive with holiday cheer, bright lights, laughter, and carols playing in every corner. But for Edward, it was just another cold night, another battle for survival. Edward had been a decorated soldier once. He had medals tucked away somewhere, buried under the weight of years of hardship and bad luck. War had changed him, left him hollow in ways he couldn't explain. When he returned home, there were no parades, no cheering crowds. There was just the reality of finding a job, a life, and a place in a world that had moved on without him. He tried to blend in, but the nightmares, the flashbacks, they made it impossible to hold a steady job. Eventually, he found himself on the streets, where he'd been for the last 5 years. That night, as Edward huddled against a wall near Trump Tower, he couldn't help but notice the man walking out of the building, dressed in an impeccable suit. His presence radiated authority and wealth. It was Donald Trump, a figure Edward had seen on TV countless times. Trump glanced briefly in Edward's direction, and for a moment, their eyes met. Edward quickly looked away, ashamed of his appearance. But something about Edward's worn face and tired eyes stuck with Trump. He paused, then walked over, ignoring the concerned looks from his security detail. "Hey," Trump said, his voice carrying both curiosity and authority. "What's your story?" Edward hesitated, unsure if this was a cruel joke. He finally muttered, "I'm nobody, just a guy trying to survive." But Trump wasn't satisfied with that answer. He pressed on, asking more questions. Slowly, Edward began to open up, sharing pieces of his life, his time in the military, the struggles he faced after coming home, and how he ended up here. Trump listened intently, something Edward hadn't expected. After a while, Trump stood up and said something that Edward would never forget. "You served this country. You don't deserve to be on the streets. Let me help." Edward wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had made him skeptical. Still, there was something in Trump's tone that felt genuine. The next day, a man in a suit found Edward and told him that Mr. Trump had arranged for him to stay in a hotel. Edward was hesitant, but accepted. For the first time in years, he slept in a warm bed. But Trump's involvement didn't stop there. He arranged for Edward to receive medical care, therapy for his PTSD, and even connected him with a program to help veterans find stable jobs. Edward was overwhelmed. He had spent so long being invisible that he didn't know how to handle someone actually caring. Months passed, and Edward's life began to change. He got a job at a veteran-owned business and started saving money. Trump would occasionally check in on him, offering words of encouragement. Edward found himself smiling more, feeling like he had a purpose again. But Edward wasn't the only one who changed. Through his interactions with Edward, Trump gained a deeper appreciation for the struggles of veterans and the homeless. He started advocating for better programs to support them, using his platform to bring attention to the issue. Critics questioned his motives, but for Edward, it didn't matter. He had seen the genuine side of Trump, a side that cared. One day, Edward stood in front of a group of people at an event Trump had organized. He was nervous but determined. "I'm not here to talk politics," he began. "I'm here to talk about hope. I had given up on myself, but someone saw me when I felt invisible. That changed everything." The room erupted in applause, and Edward felt a surge of pride. His story was proof that people could change, that life could get better even when it seemed hopeless. As the event ended, Trump walked over to Edward and shook his hand. "You've come a long way," he said with a smile. Edward nodded. "Thanks to you." "No," Trump replied, his voice firm. "Thanks to you. You reminded me why it's important to never ignore the people who need help the most." Years later, Edward would look back on that cold December night as the turning point in his life. He wasn't just a homeless veteran anymore. He was a survivor, a fighter, and an advocate for those who felt forgotten. And it all started with a simple conversation on the streets of New York.